Welcome to Comics Bazaar, the channel of comics commentary and arcana. This video features X-Men Onslaught Special Edition. The evolution of the Marvel Universe begins here. The cover is by Adam Kubert, penciling and inking himself, and it's a pretty cool designed cover featuring Onslaught up against the X-Men as they are clambering over him or atop the cover logo. Interesting feature of this logo, this is the front cover, this is the back cover, and in mirror writing this says Marvel Onslaught Universe. So this is all in advance of Heroes Reborn, the special project, year-long project headed by the return of Jim Lee and Rob Liefeld to Marvel Comics, and it gets tied in with, at the time, Marvel's biggest selling titles, the X titles. So this particular double-sized story comes immediately after the events of Uncanny X-Men 334 and the reveal to readers of the true identity of Onslaught in Adjectiveless X-Men number 54. Let's open this one up to the first page, and there is a callback here to the Whilce Portacio and Jim Lee era and issue 287 in particular of Uncanny X-Men, and that mysterious recording, that Bishop, garbled recording that Bishop in the future was familiar with, featuring Jean Grey talking about an X-Trader, but some of the recording was garbled, and now we're going to get the full recording and what she fully said, and the revelation of the X-Trader. So this is the prologue, 45 minutes from now, and we've got this tight close-up on Jean's face, Alex, Kurt, Sean, Cable, anyone. So the leaders of the other X teams at this point, X-Factor, Excalibur, Generation X, and X-Force, of course. And then we get into familiar images from the John Romita Jr. drawn Uncanny X-Men 287, and this is the speech that we did not get in full from that particular issue. The mansion has sustained massive damage, says Jean. I don't even know if this transmission is being received. If you can hear me, you need to know what happened here. The X-Men have been hit hard worse. We were taken totally unaware. Both teams, blue and gold, have been decimated. Now, by this point in X continuity, the blue and gold teams are no longer operative, but this is a callback to the dialogue of 287. If you respond to this distress call, Jean says, be advised that mansion security has been deactivated from within. As hard as it is for me to say this, you need to know we've been betrayed by one of our own. Incredible as it sounds, Professor Xavier has gone insane. The most powerful psi on the planet is no longer in control of his mutant ability. As near as I can tell, Juggernaut was the first to die. I'm the only one left standing who can make this message, and he's seen to it that my power's negated. It's our own fault, really. After what I saw in his mind, we should never have trusted that there were no after effects from Professor Xavier shutting down Magneto's mind. A reference back to Adjectiveless X-Men 25. We knew so little about the psionic damage that results from, wait, I sense he's here, you. So again, these are images from 287. And now we get the other side of the dialogue. Of course, child. Did you truly believe, even for an instant, that you would escape the same fate which befell the rest of your team? And Jean responds, I don't believe you. I can't believe you. You may have killed the X-Men, but the dream will never. And then he fills in, die. On the contrary, Jean Grey Summers, the dream is dead. So she's apparently dead. And readers are left to wonder whether it was the end of the X-Men and the fulfillment of the timeline that leads to Bishop's dystopian future. Title of the story is Traitor to the Cause, and the creative team includes Scott Lobdell and Mark Waid, credited with the story. My guess is that Lobdell is co-plotting the story with Mark Waid, but that Waid is scripting the dialogue and narrative captions. It's more like his style than Lobdell's. And the art team is Adam Kubert and Dan Green on the main portions of the story. There's about 6 pages that are produced by Pasqual, Ferry, and Art Thibert, who are credited with art assist. But as I said, it's I think five pages of story in here. that are the product of this particular team. And then rounding out the creative team, Richard Starkings and Comicraft on lettering, and Steve Buccellotto and Team Bucc on the color art, the digital color art. So let's get into the story. Now, a lot of the first few pages of this are all recap, and indeed the story as a whole doesn't really involve very much in the way of characterization. It is very, very plot driven. Really, for me, rereading this in advance of making this review video, what really stands out in this issue is the art. It's the best thing about it. The story is mediocre in my view. But beautiful images here. Adam Kubert at the beginning of this particular task, spending a lot of time on backgrounds. This is a great top-down shot of the professor in his study, which seems to be not destroyed as it was in X-Men 54. It's as if he's used his psionic powers to clean the place up again. And he's there looking at a photo of himself and Magneto from the past and thinking to himself, anything worth having is worth fighting for. Words he spoke to Magneto when they first met in Israel, however many decades before. Those were the words, weren't they, Eric? But we were young then, idealistic. And now he is dismayed, in despair, stupid. We thought we were going to change the world, you and I. Instead, the world changed us. So he casts the picture of them into the fire and it burns symbolically. And then outside we've got the X-Men. This is really coming on from the end of Adjectiveless X-Men 54. Professor X summons all the various X-Men on the grounds, and there they are. So it's a pretty nice design of the X in the middle of the page there. And we get the names and code names of all of the key players in this particular issue. Jean Grey emerging from the Xenox chamber, where she learned from her how will I put it, like her psychic entrance into Juggernaut's mind and helping him undo the block in his mind, the true identity of Onslaught. So she knows that Onslaught is Professor X. So turning the page here, we get a wonderful double page splash. Great use of perspective in this image. And I like the way that Adam Kubert has spotted the blacks there on Professor X from the fireplace, and also the way that he's drawn those splayed fingers of Professor X's hand, and that expression on his face, like he looks pretty serious, not at all jolly in this issue. And I do like too the digital coloring, the pattern on his blanket as well. That's nicely done. And you can see here in this double page spread some of the features, key features of Adam Kubert's style, his willingness to play around with extreme perspective, but also how, as characters characters in the background tend to lose detail and look a little bit more cartoonish. And so it is the case with Cyclops here, running in from some other part of the X-Mansion. But the closer up you are to a character, the more naturalistic even is his style. Over here we've got Beast, and we're reminded by his thought balloons that he is an imposter. He is Dark Beast from the Age of Apocalypse, and that's going to factor in to what happens a little later in the story. So we have a little moment between Cyclops and Jean Grey, because the moment that Jean Grey went into the Xenox chamber, Cyclops felt the dissolution of their psychic rapport, and he was worried about, was she alive or dead or whatever. He asks her about what happened, and she says, "Not now, Scott, please, but trust me, always." So those two united, and they're wondering about what is up with Professor X. He's been acting strangely in recent weeks and or even months. And so we get a recap here in Jean's thoughts of all the events leading up to this present moment, including the first time that they encountered a unconscious Juggernaut in Uncanny X-Men 322, who uttered the word Onslaught as the one responsible for punching him from Canada to New Jersey. And then most recently, her finding out from his blocked memory the true identity of Onslaught, who is of course Professor X here. So Jean continues her thoughts there, and now the professor says, I've made a mistake. And at that moment, I like this in the artwork, she grabs Scott's hand because she's worried about what's coming next. A simple, tragic mistake, an honest mistake, but a mistake nonetheless, he says. That's a very nice, extreme three-quarter profile on the professor there. Nicely drawn. And this is another interesting angle. Again, like I said earlier, Adam Kubert, always one to play around with interesting angles. We've got this kind of interesting and unusual, and you wouldn't think about drawing a top-down angle on the professor, where he's mostly in the dark there, but the light coming in from the fireplace. And he makes this big speech about how his original dream was wrong, and he says that basically for every murdering pack of Gene nationals, there is a newer, deadlier sentinel in mass production. For every exodus, an acolyte, an emplate, there's an executioner or Graydon Creed or zealot member of the Friends of Humanity. But all that changes today. I've decided it is time we take control and resolve these problems once and for all. So the professor is saying he's fed up of, on the one hand, mutant extremists, and on the other hand, human extremists in relation to the question of mutants. And that shocks all the members of the X-Men there. And Cyclops says to Jean, Jean, are you listening to all of this? But she cannot hear him, for Phoenix's mind is somewhere else at the moment. And this is a nice little sequence here. I like these tall, thin, vertical panels where Jean is pushing within her mind. And interesting how Adam Kubert has visualized this. So we see her superimposed over her own pupil, but she is trying to break into the professor's mind and appealing to him to fight Onslaught. She's even sweating, but she concludes, I'm locked out, she says. And if he doesn't let me inside on his own, it's not going to happen. So Wolverine in his bestial form saying to the professor, with all due respect, what do you flaming mean by taking control? Gambit agrees. And the professor says, in the simplest of terms, I'm talking about tending the flock, about helping people who can't find it in themselves to help themselves. And again, interesting choice here of a top-down angle, borderless panel, and Jean walking away while all the X-Men are gathered around and standing behind the professor in his armchair. And Jean thinking here, could it be that this has been about Onslaught toying with me like he did yesterday? He certainly could have placed those thoughts I found in Juggernaut's mind. I mean, as it is, Juggernaut seems to have managed to escape. And then she looks at this gem on the professor's desk. And it is the gem of Sidorak, which gave Juggernaut his power, and which Onslaught took from Juggernaut's body in Adjectiveless X-Men 54. And she sees here, and this is a great image, the Juggernaut is trapped inside the gem. So she thinks, okay, the game's up. Scott, everyone, we have to act now. She communicates to them telepathically, but it's too late. Too little, child, and far, far too late. They cannot hear you any more than they can see this pure, unadulterated psionic energy that permeates the room, energy which only I wield, and which in turn wields me. Now, at last, do you begin to understand what you relinquished when you turned down my gracious offer to stand by my side, Phoenix? So, the Jean, that's a reference to X-Men 53. So Jean there says, please, listen to me, fight him. Fight Onslaught's control over you before. But then we see this evil look on the professor's face as he turns around and he gags her with this psionic helmet. And there we have, revealed to the X-Men now, Onslaught in the place of their professor. And he says, as you can see, he says there was a Professor Xavier to attend to X-Men. As you can see, however, that is no longer the case. From now and forevermore, there is only Onslaught. And I like the detail of the fact that he's crushed that armchair and all the stuffing has come out on the floor. That's nicely done. So that really is kind of Act 1 of this double-sized special edition. And from this point on, it really is very, very plot based. So Onslaught explains how the professor created him. I was forged within the crucible of his own fear, his frustration, his rage at the injustices he saw perpetrated against his people. I was nurtured by his every darkest desire for revenge, for control, for power, incubated in the suppression of these emotions. I'm all of that and more. I am Onslaught, which, once unleashed, cannot stand abated. So in some sense, Onslaught is kind of like the professor's Jungian shadow, but there's more to it than that. And Wolverine doesn't buy it entirely. Nobody ever claimed Xavier was a saint, least of all Chuck himself. There's more here than your spilling bub. And Onslaught agrees, much more Wolverine than you can possibly imagine. And then he makes this bizarre invitation that they should follow him. Now come, follow me as you followed Xavier before. We have a world which we must set right. So he's got these utopian type dreams. And Cyclops isn't on board. For someone who professes to be the creation of Professor Xavier, he says, you sound surprisingly more like Magneto, the master of magnetism. And that gets Onslaught's attention. You doubt me, he asks. You don't believe I'm the one who trained you all, the one who knows you better than you know yourselves. With but a thought, I can reduce Wolverine to the mental state of a frightened cub. That's a great cartoony image of that. I can prompt Iceman to rearrange his body on a molecular level. We see that here. And then I can force Storm to believe she's still a child, still buried under tons of stone and steel. So, using his psionic powers to manipulate the X-Men, Cyclops lashes out with an optic beam, attacks Onslaught, and now we've got a nice little team shot of the X-Men, and they are not going to take Onslaught up on his offer. And he says, if you can hear me, Cyclops says, wherever you are inside there, you have to know that we'll fight you. As painful as it may be to stand united against you, we won't stop until you're defeated. So now it looks as if we were going to get a little fight between Onslaught and the X-Men, but instead he says, there are other things I need to do before I depart this place. It is my sincerest hope that when I return and I'm prepared to leave, at least some of you will come to your senses. So he levitates to the top of the ceiling and kind of disappears and pins the X-Men psionically in place until Gambit actually kinetically uses his mutant power to kinetically charge the floor and explode it, which breaks them free of Onslaught's control. And that gets Jean thinking, if Onslaught is as powerful as it claims to be, Gambit's power shouldn't have short-circuited the creature's hold on us, which means maybe, just maybe, it's not as in control of Xavier's faculties as it'd like us to believe it is. So Onslaught showing some weaknesses in this special edition, which of course will give hope to the X-Men to defeat Onslaught and maybe save Professor X. Interesting page this. It kind of shows that maybe Kubert at this point is under some deadline pressure. No backgrounds here at all, but nice acting and body language from Jean Grey as she runs through her thinking about Onslaught. She says, again, I should have told you earlier about Onslaught, but I was disoriented by what I'd experienced, suffering through some wave of psychic backlash. Now, Gambit is aggressive here. He says, let's stop Onslaught cold and worry about the might-have-beens later. But Wolverine, and this is interesting, in his bestial form, it should be he's saying this and maybe Gambit saying the other thing. Don't make it sound so cut and dry, LeBeau, he says. Say what you want about whatever it was that attacked us, but Chuck's still a part of it, body and soul. Very Claremontian type phrase. He ain't never gave up on this old knucklehead. I sure as flaming blazes ain't about to give up on him. And let's see what happens next. So we've got to turn this one over to the side so you can get a full look at this double page spread of the X-Men in action. Cyclops gets them to split up, and some of them, let's see. So Cyclops is en route to, where does he's going to say here? Storm Phoenix and Cannonball and Wolverine down to the Professor's ready room. There's enough hard data down there to allow Onslaught to do untold damage to our allies and enemies alike. So they're off that way. And then Cyclops is en route. We've made it. He says he's en route. They're going to need to recruit muscle power from somewhere to take on. Wait a minute. Hold on. I got a little confused there. So let's see. Yeah, it's Storm and the rest are going to download the Cerebro unit. And where is Cyclops off to? They're off to somewhere or other anyway, and we'll see where that is, continuing with the story. Let's do it that way, yes? And here we go. We get the sections of the story drawn by Pasqual, Ferry and inked by Thibert. So we've got a little scene set in the Fantastic Four's Four Freedoms Plaza headquarters in Midtown Manhattan. And so it's breakfast time here, and Franklin Richards has a creepy little, what do you call them again? Imaginary friend, whose name is Lil Charlie, and who has these very distinctive arched eyebrows. So who could that be? And Lil Charlie says to Franklin, "Pretty nice family you have here. Do you ever get scared?" "Scared? No," says Franklin. "Sure you don't want any milk?" And Lil Charlie has a temper. "I don't want any milk, no. I was asking if you're scared because the world can be mean to people who look like your parents. You know, different. Sometimes people who are different need to be protected. But that's what parents are for," says Franklin. And then he makes the point about the milk again. And Lil Charlie uses his psionic power to throw the milk on the ground. And then everybody's wondering what's going on there. Has Franklin thrown the milk on the ground? No. And Reed takes his son down to the lab, and Lil Charlie thinks, "I must learn to control my temper if I'm to control Franklin and his formidable powers." And a little Easter egg here. The Thing reading his horoscope, which says you're going to go on a long unexpected trip with 20 or 30 of your closest friends. What do you suppose that means? That means Heroes Reborn, Ben. You're off to be written and drawn by Jim Lee and crew for the next year. And then we're back to our main story. Deep within the heart of the Xavier Institute, a titanium door crumples beneath the combined abilities of several X-Men on a mission. So these are the ones down to delete the files so that Onslaught can't get a hold of them. And they see that the professor had recently pulled up files on Franklin Richards and on X-Man, and they're wondering about what all of that portends. And just at this moment, Onslaught takes over Cannonball, and Cannonball panics, and Bishop uses his bio power in order to knock Cannonball to the ground and some sense into him. Then we get this great hulking anchor image of Onslaught looming over the X-Men. Great angle there, tilted Dutch angle as well. And Wolverine says to Onslaught, "I don't see any hint of Xavier in the psi armor. I even think it's pretty obvious to everyone. I mean, the helmet, the posture, the color scheme. If I didn't know no better, and I do, I'd say you're looking an awful lot like Mag." And then Onslaught goes bananas and completely changes the topic. "Can you feel it, my X-Men, as I scream 1,000 silent screams directly into your minds? Know me, know my pain and anger and frustrations over what you've done to me. Fear me, for I am he who was Charles Xavier." And he ends it by saying, "Taste my wrath. Know your greatest fear, the power of Xavier's mind unleashed." So it's a pretty cool splash page there as well. But this is an excellent image of Onslaught. And then we're at Avengers Mansion, and X-Man, who had just been mentioned, and he's there recruiting the help of the Avengers against Onslaught. So Thor buys it because X-Man starts bleeding out his nose. And then we're back in Professor X's ready room and the aftermath of Onslaught exploding there, and everybody seems to be knocked unconscious. And Onslaught grabs Bishop in particular and says, "Irony, Bishop. Do you appreciate the extent of what has transpired for months since the moment Xavier..." And then he's constantly confusing the way he speaks about himself. Since I wiped clean the slate of Magneto's mind, as my consciousness grew, I spent hours trying to formulate a plan to spread my sphere of influence across the globe. As it turned out, I needed you for that. I needed the memories you had of having lived through the so-called Age of Apocalypse in order to learn how Ansaba accomplished a less benevolent version of what I intend to achieve. Therein lies the irony of it all, for I could never have done what you came from the future to stop, would have never betrayed my children without your help. Thank you. So again, that just ties up in an ironic bow the hints of a betrayal all the way back in Uncanny X-Men 287, and it is ironic who the X-Traitor turned out to be. And here, yes, we see the original X-Men minus Archangel or Angel in Professor X's Cerebro room, and they're basically what are they doing there? They are they're putting Cerebro out of action, so that it is left to be little more than a ghost in the shell. And Bobby's keeping an eye out at the door, and Jean wonders, why are you keeping such a close eye on the door? Onslaught is giving off enough ambient energy that if it gets within 30 feet of here, I can warn us. But Bobby's concentrating, and then this moment, gotcha, he says. So let's see, what's he got? He's got Onslaught snuck up on them. And this was all on account of the way that Iceman has been developing his powers. So he was able to see everything only in terms of body temperatures. I was onto you the second you entered the room. So Onslaught impressed. Jean again insisting that maybe the professor's in there and to fight Onslaught. But Onslaught uses his psionic power to take over their minds and make them attack each other. That's a really cool image there of Onslaught turning Cyclops' optic blast against himself. And now Dark Beast breaks character. And I like this image of him clapping with his feet. And Onslaught reveals that he's known all along that that Dark Beast was posing as the real McCoy. I've known since the moment you first entered the mansion, posing as this world's beast. Who do you think has been masking your true psi patterns while you've been living amongst four of the world's most powerful telepaths? So Dark Beast grins there and says, so then you must also know I have resources you might find valuable. And this is an interesting little moment where Onslaught says there's nothing you can offer me, and then he falters and he begins to fall over, and Beast holds him up from falling. Onslaught, what's wrong, he says. Seems I'm not as strong, as powerful as I intend to be, as inevitably I will be. Do you truly wish to serve me? And so Beast says yes. Then you won't mind that I siphoned a trifling of your own straight thoughts for a reason I cannot quite fathom. My host Xavier is resisting me. So Jean is right. Professor X is in there and he's resisting Onslaught. And then Onslaught has a plan for Jean. He takes her somewhere within the mansion or outside the mansion, and he tries to get inside her mind. This is an interesting page here, interesting image of Jean upside down and Onslaught probing her mind. He says, so he's probing her mind there, but we don't learn what exactly it is that he's up to. And he's annoyed at her constant resistance, which is only pulling him away from his natural assimilation of Xavier's prowess. So Jean makes the point, for someone possessed of enough power to destroy stars, you seem quite dependent on others. And he replies, only for the moment. So Onslaught tells Beast to, since the X-Men aren't going to be joining them, to dispose of the bodies. Beast wants to experiment on them genetically, or study their genetic potentials. And Onslaught says, no, my will, as you and the rest of the world will learn, is absolute. And then he turns around. So again, this is all part of establishing that he's flawed. He's not yet a god, despite all his rhetoric. Phoenix is gone. Jean is rushing into the Xenox chamber. And this is the moment. So now we're bookending the issue. We're 45 minutes later now, where we started 45 minutes in the future at the beginning of the issue. So we've caught up to that moment. Jean is on the computer making the call to the leaders of the other X teams, and Onslaught's outside the Xenox chamber, and he just bursts inside. And so we pick up with that dialogue again from the beginning of the issue, but we see it now from another perspective, not the perspective of Jean on the screen, but what was actually happening in the Xenox chamber. So Onslaught attacks her, looks like he's about to kill her. The dream is dead, he says. At that moment, says you, bub, a single beam of crimson punctures the ceiling, and it's Wolverine and Cyclops. And that, I suppose, is fitting, like the two X-Men who love Jean Grey there to rescue her. And here we get a wonderful double-page splash of all the X-Men outside the hole they've punched through the Xenox chamber, and they're about to attack. That's a great top, like worm's eye view angle on the X-Men, especially of Cyclops there. Really great command of foreshortening and perspective. So another Claremontian phrase: no quarter asked for X-Men and none given, as they go to attack Onslaught. Let's see what happens. So they make a little bit of progress on Onslaught. You can see here on these pages, they get him down on the ground. It looks like their teacher, their founder, is dead at their hands. But of course not. So somebody from behind Bishop says, you realize, of course, this is all your fault. Turn the page. Because of your failure, Bishop, everyone dies. 100 years from this moment, it says in the third person narration, the X-Men will have been murdered, betrayed by one of their own. That's what would have happened if not for the determination of one man, a man who in an instant, in a single act of self-sacrifice, throws himself between the forces of destiny and reality. So, Bishop, this is nice, turns out to have prevented his own future from coming about by leaping in between Onslaught and a psionic attack that with an energy enough to stop 1,000 mutants, but of course it's Bishop's power to absorb energy, and so he manages to absorb all that energy. Onslaught says, another time and place, I would have been proud. So Onslaught and Beast disappear. Onslaught saying that he's going to show everyone his mighty hand and the world will tremble before him. And now we have the aftermath as the X-Men pick themselves up. This is a trope, a kind of like a layout trope of Adam Kubert. Sometimes he'll go with a 4-panel layout, just a basic 4-panel grid, and I like it. And I like the way he varies it, that sometimes one of those panels will be borderless, as these two are as well. So Gambit is the one who helps Bishop off the ground, and of course that's a nod to the fact that Bishop always thought that Gambit was the X-Traitor, but now it's been proven very clearly that he's not. This is a nice image here of Wolverine and Storm reflected in Cyclops' visor, and they're thinking here about the recent applications of Cerebro and the data files, the obsession with X-Man and Franklin Richards, and also thinking about, is Magneto involved? Gambit says here, nice top-down angle there as well. If Magneto is still alive, is it possible he's somehow exerting his mind over Xavier's? And Cyclops says, unlikely, but at this juncture we have to assume anything is possible, including the very real possibility that this may be the entire reason we were brought together in the first place. The Professor first gathered us here to learn about our powers, true, but also to protect the world from the threat of mutants who could not or would not control their genetic abilities. When next we meet Onslaught, we must be prepared to accept that in order to stop him, we may be forced to kill Professor Xavier. So those are the stakes now. And then a last page, somewhere within the unsuspecting heart of America, at a Sentinel manufacturing factory, one of these workers is asking his colleague, what do you think, Tim, we'll ever have to actually use these mutant hunting robots? And the colleague says, no. Sentinels are kind of like nuclear bombs. Just having them around is enough to keep mutants in line. Trust me, I know what I'm talking about. And then we get the phrase Onslaught. And what does it mean? Well, we'll find out in Adjectiveless X-Men number 55 what this is a lead up to. So I do hope that you enjoyed this review and commentary on X-Men Onslaught, the special edition. Like I said earlier, there isn't much in the way of characterization in this particular issue. A lot of it is plot driven, and really what it does is it picks up and ties off that plot line going all the way back to Whilce Portacio's run on Uncanny X-Men, the whole mystery of the X-Trader. So that's resolved now, but the question is, Xavier's in Onslaught somewhere fighting Onslaught. What's Magneto got to do with things as well? These are the mysteries yet to be unfolded in the Onslaught saga. So I do hope that you enjoyed this review and commentary on X-Men Onslaught. If you did, please like the video on YouTube. It really does help the channel. And if you haven't done so already, subscribe to the channel and stay tuned for more content like this.